Well, Salim, it's a very tumultuous time. It continues the riots, the protests, the tearing down of statues, the destruction of all things Western in its in nature. And on June 1st, there was an article that struck me, and you as well. It's by Rex Murphy in the National Post. A week ago, he wrote that Canada is not a racist country. And he wrote that article in response to Catherine McKenna, who is in the cabinet of Justin Trudeau. She's in the government. And she tweeted out the following. She said, right now, thousands, if not millions, are marching, fighting, and protesting for their basic human rights. We need to acknowledge that racism and discrimination are part of our reality here in Canada and around the world, and we need to call it out. We have to do better. She continued on in another tweet, we need to have a hard look at how policing is practiced, especially here, in relation to racialized communities, whatever racialized mean. Now, what I gathered from McKenna's tweets, and I'll get to Rex Murphy's article in a moment, what I gathered from her tweets is, right off the bat, she's in the government. People are protesting the actions of government agents, the police. So rather than come out and basically say that we're the problem, we're the racists, right? We're doing something wrong, she has actually been marching, defying social distancing protocol at the time, against herself. She's in the government. Now, mind you, she's right in the cabinet as well. She has the air of Bill Blair, the minister responsible for the RCMP and policing on a federal level. She has the air of Justin Trudeau, the prime minister, who can, just like China, turn things around on a dime, should he wish, at this particular point in time with Parliament dissolved. But instead of taking some of the blame for some of the issues that people are raising, she turns it around and says, no, you're the problem. And by you, she doesn't mean people of color or Indigenous people or new Canadians. She means me. She means somebody, old stock, as Stephen Harper would say, an old stock Canadian. You know, people who are white, people who came from European backgrounds. That's who she's referring to, and in doing so, she's being a racist herself to suggest that we, Canadians, are racist. So, Rex Murphy, of course, another one of those old stock Canadians, took issue with that, as I did, and wrote an article, June 1st. You can look it up online. I'll put the link in the description below. But he concludes his article by saying, 20 fair mind, Canada is a mature, welcoming, open-minded, and generous country. It would be helpful if these liberals kept the full story of this country in mind when discussing racism, and not leap so reflexively to grim characterizations of a country that, while not perfect, has been doing its best to be tolerant and welcoming. And I couldn't agree more, of course. Of course, Rex is right on. These liberals see everything through a racist lens. They are the racists. Everything to them is racism or collectivism or group or identity politics. And so he was pilloried. He was destroyed, or certainly attempts had been made to destroy him in the media. Water off a duck's back if you know anything about Rex and criticism. And I understand that you know Rex. So I would like your opinion on Rex's piece, on Catherine McKenna's tweets, on the action of government, of Justin Trudeau, joining protests and kneeling like some disgraced, shameful, delusional lunatic out there, not realizing, of course, that the protesters are protesting the government and he is the government. What do you think, Salim?
Well, I think, Robert, there's so much to say, but in one quick phrasing, I would say we are now living in an upside down world. You know, totally. I mean, when as per the gospel story and what we have learned and come down, about this story. That is, uh, on Good Friday, uh, Jesus was brought in front of Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate then says, well, what is the truth? And he washes his hand. What is the truth? 2,000 years later, that's the whole issue. What is the truth? The truth is what is on a plasma screen at a given moment in time, you and I on the computer screen, on the television screen. That is whatever is manipulated, the image and the word, and is manipulable, is the truth. It has no other context. So in that sense, I'm saying Rex was like Jesus in front of Pontius Pilate. That is, the people who today ask the question, what is the truth, and manipulate it. And Rex was saying, Canada is not a racist society. Let's put it in context. Let's understand the historical context. But what is the historical context? It can be manipulated in a nanosecond on a plasma screen, or words created, and that's what happened. Because there is no, Rex was going against that manipulated narrative that has now been constructed by our ruling elite, by our academia, by our media. And behind it, of course, is the technologists who are working with words and pictures and can manipulate it instantly. And that is a fascinating story, but that's the world we are living in. And so there's no longer anymore an objective reality that can be independently examined and assessed and discussed. It is whatever is at the moment that is created and is pushed through the media, and remember, it was the Canadian Marshall McLuhan who 50 plus years ago said, media is the message. So, you begin with Catherine McKenna. All the eyes of the media is on her. She manipulates the story. What is the story? Her boss. This is the guy with the black face who is lecturing you and all of us Canadians about racism. Now, if anybody needs to apologize, it should begin with the black face, the man who is our, manipulated media image of a prime minister, actually getting down on his knees, which he did, by the way. He got down on his knees to confess that Canadians are racist. He did that a couple of days ago in Ottawa. So he should get down, not confessing that Canadians are racist, that I put on a black face, and for whatever reason, he should go out and say that, I acted as a racist. I insulted people of color by, painting my face and mimicking them and imitating them. But that's not what has been done. It is the other thing. It is, I am guilty, but I'm guilty with all of you, and all of you, that is a particular segment of the Canadian population, are racist. And that's why we are in the world we are in. And the references to what has been happening in the United States following the death or murder of George Floyd. And that too is now open to so many different discussion about image alteration, image manipulated. But where the protest movement, again, morphed almost instantly into a crowd, into a mob, into a vandalizing, destroying, plundering, pillaging, putting to torch the American city. That's where we have arrived at. So Rex Murphy, in that sense, is simply a data point. It doesn't matter who he is. I know him, I love him, I respect him. I consider him as a friend. He has written about me. He has been very generous in writing and referring to my books. And here is a man with not an iota of anything that can be called racism, but the word racism is now empty of any of its meaning. It is simply, a vessel, an artificially created image in which whatever can be written by the algorithm now at play on our computer screen is racism, and
To
no
your
longer
point,
any has any sense to it.
to your point, Salim, there's a duplicity, a hypocrisy in everything that the liberals are doing when they, on the one hand, identify Canada as an open-minded, inclusive, diverse mosaic of multicultures. That is the image that they're portraying. Come to Canada, we welcome you, we love you, we're not racist. On the other side, they immediately say that, hey, we're all a bunch of racists here, we should all get down on our knees and repent for our racism. So, which is it? Are we racists? Are we inclusive? And more to that point, just think of what Jagmeet Singh said recently. On the one hand, he was saying that police should not apprehend people based on their obvious characteristics, their external appearance, their color. And then, in the same sentence, basically, he said that the judges should be more lenient towards Aboriginals, black people, people who are visible minorities. So, again, the hypocrisy. Justice should be blind, but be more lenient to people of color, like him. You know? So it's the hypocrisy that gets me. This two-face, this black face, this white face, this justice is blind, justice is not blind. What are these liberals doing?
Well, I mean, what they're doing is they're being ironically consistent with where the world is headed. You know, I mean, we have to now begin to examine the words that we use and how we communicate. You and I are still wedded to the idea that there is an objective reality, independent of our subjective emotions and desires and will. You know, so a standard exists. There is the world of gravity, that is, there is the world of physics that is independent of you and I, of anybody else, you know, and we simply cannot go up to whatever height we want to and take a leap and then believe that we can fly like Peter Pan. Peter Pan is a symbolism, you know, where in that world objective reality doesn't exist. But if you and I do that, we will fall down and break our neck. However, we are living in a world where the objective reality and our subjective wishes and desires have been totally disconnected. We're living in a world of virtual reality. So our students, our young people, that is the millennials and the Generation Z and so on and so forth, are living in a world in which they can completely disconnect themselves from the world of physics and laws of physics to the world which they are living in, talking to, engaging with, is in their handheld screen. That is the screen that is the plasma reality. So there is the screen out there which you and I look at, and I mean that's the screen that is the world. But they are not paying attention to that world because their screen to which they are absorbing that manipulated information, that data, is in their held reality. So when Pontius Pilate says what is truth, and today when you say what is justice, the reference point is not to an objective reality out there that every one of us can relate to, because we can understand that that is the standard against which I and people around me will measure ourselves. So what has happened is, I mean, you use the word multiculturalism. Well, this is it. We are living in a multicultural world, which is the world that is now the agenda of the United Nations. 50 years ago, you know, I wrote a book about this. I tried to talk about this to the people around me and people with whom you and I were connected. I mean, it is not only Rex Murphy that has been, in that sense, assaulted in the world of virtual reality and called all sorts of names, ironically, by this woman in National Post who wrote a counter article or op-ed. Her name, if I recall, she's of Indian origin, Vanmala Subramaniam.
Yes, I'll put a link up to that particular response by her.
Yes. So, but she is ethnically in origin as I am, and so both of us, this woman who wrote the piece, who by the way works for National Post, the financial arm of National Post, Financial Post, and therefore she. I mean, when you look at her resume, she is a woman who has been in the elite force, that is the media, and she has held positions uh, which are not someone working the street collecting garbages. She is the one who's manipulating information for her readers out there as part of the editorial staff of Financial Post and National Post. And she excoriates um, Rex Murphy by saying that Rex Murphy is living in an alternative universe. It is, she's saying to him, you come into my universe and see the fact of how racist Canada is, and everybody else there is clapping at her, that is the people, the readers. I was appalled to look at the letters pages of National Post, and there was hardly any letter. If I recall, there was not even one letter defending Rex Murphy. It was all about how Rex Murphy is a man of white privilege and doesn't understand the reality of Canada, a Canada in which he was born, a Canada which was built up by his ancestors, your ancestors. That is the Canada that he inherited and to which he has contributed every ounce of what he is as a Canadian, has no more a measure of reality. It is the reality that is spouted by Vanmala Subramaniam and all the others who are virtue signaling that Canada is a racist society because it doesn't meet the definition of multiculturalism. And here you have it. Canada is a country that, in a sense, was the first experiment in multiculturalism more than half a century ago. The current Prime Minister's father was the man who introduced multiculturalism into Canada, and we can talk about that. And I pointed out now, almost a decade ago, in my book, Delectible Lie, that this is a total oxymoron. That the whole notion and the idea that all cultures are equal, therefore, a culture that, like the Taliban in Afghanistan, or the culture of the nomads of the deserts of Arabia and North Africa, is equal to the culture made or brought about by people who have put man on the moon, who have decoded the DNA, who have written and spliced the genome code. Where does this idea come from? This is cultural relativism gone totally absurd. But the absurd becomes real. And so my opening remark, we are living in an upside down world. And so all cultures are equal. And the end result of that is where we are, the only culture that cannot be spoken of, that cannot be defended, that cannot be put as a standard of measure and objective reality for Canada, for the United States, for Western Europe. That is the culture built by the white man. That is the culture that can no longer be defended. And anyone who dares defend that culture is therefore a racist. I mean, look at this. This is the United Nations ideology today. It is not something, it began 50 years ago, but it is the United Nations, and we can go into the depths of it. But look at the absurdity of the upside down world. The Human Rights Council in the United Nations is chaired, or the members are members like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, China, country that practices racism, bigotry of the worst sort. Countries where there is homophobia that is prevalent, where there is gender discrimination that is prevalent, And these are the countries that are sitting in the Human Rights Council, and people like Catherine McKenna and Justin Trudeau with a black face is telling Canadians that you are racist. But you look at the Human Rights Council, what used to be, I believe, called the Human Rights Commission of the UN, and was turned around and given a new name, is packed up with countries who are sitting in judgment, who on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, engages in discrimination, who have engaged in crimes against humanity. So our intellectuals in the United States, in Canada, don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the genocides in Rwanda, the failed states of Somalia, the massacres that have been committed in recent time, very recent time, in the Middle East. They wanted to talk about that, because to talk about that would be itself be then deemed racist. So what they want to talk about is the racism that is non-existent in Canada, the crimes that are non-existent in Canada, but inflated and then engage in this trade-off. It is the admission of the white guilt in the making of the modern world. So the whites are guilty of all the crimes that one can imagine. And the whites have to engage in penance. But only the whites can engage in penance, and that's the trade-off.
Yeah.
The whites will engage in penance, that is the white guilt, that we did this, and you can see all the pictures around us now. Folks are kneeling, folks are washing the feet of colored people, you know, the degree of abasement and self-loathing that is going on.
Yeah.
But the trade-off is that it is the whites then is the source of redeeming all the other cultures, all the other ethnic groups, and put them back as, you know, human beings, in the sense that they will fulfill their potential.
Yeah, Rex came up with something else in his article, a distinction that was probably overlooked by a lot of people. Justin Trudeau said that many Canadians of diverse backgrounds are watching, like all Canadians are, the news out of the United States with shock and with horror. And Rex says, I can agree with most of that, though I don't know why he made a distinction between Canadians of diverse backgrounds and all Canadians. So here you have it. Justin Trudeau is distinguishing, on the one hand, white Canadians from Canadians of diverse background. As like, my background isn't diverse enough. His background isn't diverse enough, being a white man, for his narrative. So what do you think of that? This compartmentalizing of, like you as a brown Caucasian from India, would be in a separate privileged caste, to use that same word that the Indians would use, than myself. I would be in a lower caste in Justin Trudeau's world.
Justin Trudeau is simply the vessel. He is no longer, in that sense, a thinking, sensate, articulate human being. You know, he is the holograph that can be projected on a screen. You know, I mean, all of these that I'm trying to refer to has been played out, but it has now become more sophisticated. Look, about 20 years ago, if you recall, Robert, it is in the Hollywood and movie industry and in the music industry, these were experimented. So there was that famous song of Nat King Cole, the man with the most one of the most melodious voices, you know, from the 1950s and 60s, a great black singer who lived through the era of desegregation and worse, you know, that they could go into 5-star hotels and places like Las Vegas and others and be on the stage and entertain the white privileged crowd singing there, but they could not. They had to enter from the backstage and then they had to leave. Those were the rules of those days in the southern United States and segregation. So you will recall that about 20 years ago, his one of his more famous song, Unforgettable, was redone by the magic of computer technology and algorithm, where he and his daughter, he was long dead and gone, but his daughter, Natalie Cole, a Grammy Award singer, came on live, and he was projected onto the stage through a hologram live, and father and daughter then sing together Unforgettable. So now we are living in that world in which Justin Trudeau or his cabinet are simply faces. What they're mouthing, what they're saying is the people from behind who are operating. And the people from behind who are operating is the new elite. They were the elite, but they are now the new elite out to redo the world. This world is their creation. That is the world that they want, and they're going to establish it by hook or by crook. That is the one borderless world. They have succeeded in trafficking and moving out the productions from North America and Western Europe to China. And now they're turning around and recasting the political scenario. So what Justin Trudeau does is immaterial. What Justin Trudeau is successful in doing is what the people behind him want to do. So we saw that in the October 2019 election. It doesn't matter what facts we put on the table, what evidence we bring to table. It is the digital manipulation that happens both on screen and in the media that will carry the day. And I'm afraid that's where we have arrived. Donald Trump, in that sense, is the last man standing, the thin blue line standing, between that globalist one world that is in the making and, in some ways, the preservation of our world on the basis of objective standards and controlling our own destiny as a nation state and as a people, as a free people. And that's the struggle that is going on. And I'm afraid that the globalists have the edge because they have their hands on the levers of the new technology.
Can we, using their own techniques, definitions, and processes, turn this around and say that, even though you and I both know that Canada is not a racist country, Canada is a racist country. And by that, of course, I mean that our elites, Justin Trudeau, Catherine McKenna, Jagmeet Singh, all of the people in Parliament, and by that I mean all of the people in Parliament, with a possible exception of 2 or 3 that come to mind. So in other words, the Conservatives as well, all of them are racists in that they ascribe to the concept of multiculturalism. They ascribe to and believe in the protection of certain groups, minorities, to the exclusion of the supposed majority, which is the old stock Canadians, the white males. There are provisions in our Constitution, it's written right into our laws, that certain groups, certain races, certain language, sects have privilege, whether it's Aboriginal, French, people of color. They are protected by our hate speech laws, while whites are not. Christians are not. Muslims are. Christians aren't. Sikhs are. Christians aren't. So in that respect, we're a racist country. If you think of, for example, the Globalist report, which says that if an Aboriginal is convicted of a crime, the fact that he grew up on a reserve should be taken into account for his sentencing and have a lenient sentence imposed upon him if that's the case. And yet if a white person grows up in equally deplorable conditions, that doesn't matter. So using those sets of standards, could we not then rightly say that Canada is systemically a racist country?
No, Canada is not a racist country, but the virtual reality says it is a racist country. And therefore, you and I, or anyone else that stands up, as Rex Murphy did, to pen a column which he published, Rex Murphy is excoriated. You and I will be excoriated. I mean, Stockwell Day had to resign all his position, or he resigned all his position, because Stockwell Day, soon after Rex Murphy's story broke, went on air, because he's on air. He was part of the panel of CBC on power and politics for quite some time, as a former leader of the Canadian Alliance that morphed into Conservative Party in 2003. Stockwell Day is a conservative. He's also a social conservative. He's a Christian evangelical, I believe. He was the treasurer of Alberta, from where he went on to become the leader of the Canadian Alliance after Preston Manning. So here's a man with some record in national affairs, a man who is an honest and hardworking and dedicated Canadian to the values of Canada. And so in the panel discussion, he pointed out, that all of this talk about Canada as a racist society, what the Prime Minister is engaging in and his cabinet is engaging in, is incorrect. Canada is not a racist society. We don't have a history parallel to that of the United States. Canada never had a slave background. In fact, it was just the opposite. Prior to the Civil War in America, Blacks seeking refuge and running away as slaves to freedom came to British North America under the British rule and found shelter and refuge here in Canada. So we don't have a history of slavery. After all, in this particular history of slavery, and the emancipation of slave, no one has played a more important role than the white man, in the sense it is the European, particularly the British, who first took the step to outlaw slavery and in that sense emancipate the slaves. And then that struggle was succeeded by what happened in the United States, the emancipation. So here it is. Slavery is like the other profession, the oldest profession, has been around since time immemorial. The black man, the colored people of what is today the Middle East, of Africa, as well as the Europeans, that is the Romans and the Greeks and so on, have engaged in slavery. And if you want to see slavery in the 21st century, we have to go to parts of the Middle East. We have to go to parts of Africa to see slavery still alive. You have to go to India to see slavery alive, in the fashion of how the underclass works and operates and are treated. India is, of course, a culture of the caste system. And though constitutionally caste was abolished, it was abolished by the British in the British time, and then subsequently in independent India, constitutionally it was abolished. But what can be legally abolished cannot be abolished if it is still in your heart, in the heart of man. So whether it is slavery, whether it is prostitution, whether it is whatever form of cultural depravity that is in the heart of the individual, cannot be abolished simply by a law. It has to be transformed. The person has to abolish it. In the Quran, in my tradition, in the scripture of Islam, that is the verse. The verse says, God doesn't change the condition of a people unless they change what is in their heart. The individual have to change. That is the process of education and transformation. So it is the legal side of it and the physical side of it. It began, the emancipation of slavery began in North America. But Canada is not part of that history. So where does it come, this idea that we are a racist society? I would say it comes right out of the playbook of multiculturalism. It is when Canada adopted under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, or when Pierre Elliott Trudeau brought forth the policy of multiculturalism, and then that was subsequently changed into a statute and written into the Charter of Rights. First into the statute, it was done by the Conservative Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney. We were on the slippery slope of group identity. It is when we're no longer thinking about slavery is a group identity. It doesn't matter, whether you are an Einstein who happened to be a black man, or whether you are a Mona Lisa who happens to be a black woman. There is no objective reality. You are black, you will be a slave, to whoever has taken hold of you and possesses you. So this is a group identity. Slavery is a group identity, that is what it was in the southern states. Whereas the culture of freedom that you and I have talked about so often is the culture of the recognition of the individual worth. That is what Martin Luther King talked about. And Martin Luther King talked about it, that we will be judged. That is the dream that he had. That is the civil rights movement that he, among others, among the Afro-Americans, led in the 1960s, in the 1950s and 60s, that we will not be judged by the color of our skin. We will be judged by the content of our character. That is individual again. It is our individual worth. That is what the Declaration of Independence in the American case stands for. That our unalienable right, that we are created equal and endowed by a creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We are created equal as individuals. It's not an issue about group identity. But what multiculturalism about group identity is identity politics. And that's what Justin Trudeau is playing out, because that's the ideology of the globalists. That's the ideology of the Marxists who are progressivists in North America, because they can't sell themselves as Marxists, because the ideology of Marxism is based again on group identity, the working class identity. It is class struggle. Whereas, classical liberalism, where George Washington stood, where Thomas Jefferson stood, where Adam Smith stood, where David Hume and John Locke stood, where ultimately Jesus Christ stood, is about the individual. There is no freedom unless it is individual freedom. So if I might quickly read something here, I have my book here in hand. It was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, as we have talked about, who introduced the idea of multiculturalism. But about just before he died, by the way, 2000 will be the 20th anniversary of his death. He died in the year 2000. I think it was September 2000. So just a few years before he died, he was invited to the parliament on a special occasion by the Speaker of the House to meet with a select group of parliamentarians. It was a private meeting outside of camera, and it was agreed upon that nobody is going to talk about what is discussed in that private meeting. However, much later, one of the members in that private meeting was a member of parliament from, I believe, um, in the Kitchener-Waterloo area by the name of John Bryden. And John Bryden spoke about this lunch that was arranged with Pierre Elliott Trudeau in the late 1990s with Ottawa Citizen journalists who then published the report of what had happened and brought it to the attention of Canadians. So I cite that report and write in my in the discussion in the book Delectible Lie, because it is very remarkable of what was reported. And I'll just take a minute and I want to read to you the words of Mr. Trudeau. In this discussion, the speaker said that the attending parliamentarians, they can ask the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, one question. So there were about 24 parliamentarians, and each were going to ask one question of the former Prime Minister, and the former Prime Minister would take the time to respond. So John Bryden asked the following question. He asked the Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, you were one of the key architects of multiculturalism. And now we are in a situation where many newcomers to Canada consider their ethnicity before being Canadian. Is this the outcome you wanted? And then Bryden says that former Prime Minister Trudeau went into a long silence before he spoke. And this is what he then responded to John Bryden. He said, no, this is not what I wanted. And then Mr. Bryden then carries on and he puts it, Pierre Elliott Trudeau's word into his own word. He paraphrases the Prime Minister. He said, it was fascinating to hear. It was clear that he, that is Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was deeply disappointed that under the Mulroney government and driven by a fear of separatism, the whole multiculturalism policy had been twisted to celebrate a newcomer's country of origin and not a celebration of the newcomer becoming part of the Canadian fabric. Multiculturalism had become, in the words of the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, a celebration of the newcomer's country of origin and not a celebration of the newcomer becoming part of the Canadian fabric. In other words, Pierre Elliott Trudeau repudiated multiculturalism. And further evidence of that is that in the last book that was published by Pierre Elliott Trudeau, called Towards a Just Society, which he co-authored with his principal secretary, Tom Axworthy, in Towards a Just Society, it's about 250 pages, the book. It is about his 15 years as Prime Minister or thereabouts, and all the various struggles that he was engaged in what was his claim or his vision to move Canada towards a just society. And in that book, Robert, there is no mention of multiculturalism. In the index, there is no reference to multiculturalism. And so the big question mark, why not? Because Trudeau, in that sense, many of us might disagree with his politics and what he did to Canada in terms of his constitutional and federal relationship with the provinces, of which we are still paying the price. But one thing, it needs to be said, at least from my perspective, that Trudeau remained a classical liberal. For him, it was about individual freedom. And so he was the man, along with Lester Pearson, who had pushed Canada to adopt bilingualism. And so it became bilingualism and biculturalism. English and French, not multiculturalism. Multiculturalism was simply a policy that he pushed in a way, as he said, to make new Canadians feel comfortable and celebrate their becoming Canadian. But it morphed into what in effect it has become. Multiculturalism is a politics of group identity, which is what Arthur Schlesinger, the great democratic historian from Harvard, in his book, talked about the disuniting of America or the disuniting of Canada. And so there you have it. In the case of Rex Murphy, this woman, Vanmala Subramaniam, she brings the entire baggage of India in her own subconscious mind and excoriates Rex Murphy, who doesn't have an iota of whatever may be defined as racism, that is, the practice of bigotry directed towards a group defined either in terms of ethnicity, color, religion, or ideology. No, Rex is a Canadian and he sees us that there is no racism in Canada, which is a fact. I can testify to it. I know both culture. I know from inside the wreckage of Islam. And here it is, the celebration of Islamism. The celebration, as you say, where any discussion of Islam as a culture or as a religion can be defined as Islamophobia. Well, I'm a product of that culture, and I know it from deep inside. Some of the worst criminal activity in terms of crime against humanity has been carried out in the Muslim world. I survived a genocide where Muslims killed Muslims, the largest genocide after Second World War that happened was in former East Pakistan, where I was a teenager. 3 million people and 10 million people were driven out of their home. And here it is, Miss Vanmala Subramaniam, I'm just referring to her as the voice of this multicultural Canada, telling Rex Murphy against, or Stockwell Day, that Canada is a racist society where we, the new Canadians, have found our most secure shelter and refuge and our dreams fulfilled as individual Canadians.
Truly, Salim, an upside down world, and I would encourage our viewers to get a copy of your book, Delectible Lie, A Liberal Repudiation of Multiculturalism. They can still get it on Amazon, so have a look there. And until next time, Salim, let's hope that the world turns a little bit more right side up, but I'm not holding my breath. Thank you very much.
Thank you.